Welcome to my channel about how to use games, any game really, for education and self-improvement. For my first episode, we're going to be Bitburning. And by that, I mean we're playing Bitburner. This game is all about programming and problem solving using code. I keep seeing questions asking if one can use it to learn code. The answer is yes. It's not going to teach you directly, but it's a great tool to get you more than started. Heads up, this is an introductory episode. So if you already know you love to code, and you are past the tutorial, you should probably just move on to the next episode. For everyone else, the format for this first video is going to be a little bit different than the others. First, we're going to discuss what it takes to be a programmer. Second, we'll tackle the tutorial. It's pretty short. After that, I'm going to talk about the code environment itself. That means the code editor for the most part. Finally, I'll address useful resources for both this game and that most software creators keep at the ready throughout their career. Honestly, the most interesting stuff is going to start in the next episode. So, who can be a programmer? What does it take? And the answer to that is actually pretty simple. To be a good programmer, you need two things really. You need to be observant and to be able and willing to learn quickly. And that's because of what a programmer does. A programmer actually has to take concepts that are often not in their wheelhouse, in somebody else's wheelhouse, and translate them step by step, including the steps that most people aren't even aware are there, into computer code so that the person who needs to use it can use it. But you have to be able to learn a lot of things very, very quickly. Add to that that tech is constantly changing and things are generally just getting better. That means that the programmer just has a lot on their plate to learn all the time. So that's really all it takes to get going. While we just mull that around in our head, why don't we get started with the tutorial? Again, it's going to be pretty quickly. There might be a little bit of interjection here because I talk a lot. So, tutorial. And we're going to move on, not skip, move on. All right, the tutorial will adjust to your programming ability. I don't know about that. That's not really been my experience, but certainly it's a possibility. They give you two options here, NS1 and NS2. NS stands for NetScript. In both cases, we're going to be learning JavaScript, but I think the real difference here is that with NS1, you're going to be basically learning a subset of JavaScript. NetScript basically limits what it is that you can do. It's not all of JavaScript as it is presented today. So we're going to go with NS2 because if you're sticking with me, you're probably serious about learning whether or not you've got it. So NS2 it is. Okay, and now we're going to just follow the instructions on the screen. So we're going to go and look at stats. I'll be talking about some of these in greater detail later. And a lot of important information. Yes, it is a lot of important information. I do agree. Now we're going to go to the terminal, and this is kind of where we're going to get started. They're going to have us type in a few commands. I'm going to kind of race through them. Now I am going to highlight just a couple of things here real quick. These are all just commands. These aren't your scripts. These aren't programs as far as the game considers them. They're just little commands that fit into the operating system. Many of them are based on Linux. And there we go. We get to list our programs. Now this is actually our files, the files that we have contributed or the files that are on our system. And we start with one, nuke.exe. Use the command to see the network a little bit. Got 7 servers that we're connected to directly. And they want us to get a little bit more information. And we can see that we've got a hacking skill, whether or not we got root access, number of open ports required to use our nuke program, and the amount of RAM on each server. We're going to be doing the same thing, but we're going to be doing it with an argument. Remember that word that's going to come up later a lot. And this argument allows us to go a little bit deeper. So these 2 servers are connected to Noodles. This server is connected to Sigma Cosmetics. This server is connected to Harakiri Sushi. But the ones that are only one that are not actually indented at all, they're connected to me. It wants us to connect to demonstrate a couple of things. And so when you're connected to the server, you can get much more detailed information. So not only do we know whether or not we have root access, we know whether or not we can run scripts on the server. We know whether or not the server is backdoored. And we know what the hacking skill is for hack and backdoor. Our chance to hack, what the security level is, a whole bunch of various information. Not only do we know how many open ports there are, but we know what the ports are: SSH, FTP, SMTP, HTTP, and SQL. That will be useful coming later as well. But now what it wants us to do is it wants us to run our nuke program. So we do it, and look at that. It was successful, and it says we can now run scripts on the server. It's not going to let us though, so we're just going to hack it because that is what it told us to do. And hacking takes an amount of time based on what your skill is. We started at 1, so we have almost nothing. And then even though we can skip it, I'm just going to run through grow real quick just to kind of show you, because all 3 of these are going to take time. And you'll notice that when I do a hack and when I do a grow, it says security increased. So that's going to be an important concept later. But that when I do a weaken, security decreases. So we're just going to move on. And it wants us to go home. And now we start to getting our first script. Here, all you have to do is click in the box. We already have it all. I want to make sure that I always have this. This is one of the most useful lines that I've got highlighted. So I'm just going to take everything else. I'm just going to paste that in there. And we're going to save that. And now we're going to check how much free RAM we have, 8 gigabytes. And we're going to run our script. It says that it's running and it wants me to check active scripts. And this is like a simple task manager here. Just show you real quick. Look at that. It's got our script listed there. This bar up here represents the amount of RAM that our server has. And you can see that our script actually takes a decent chunk of it. That's going to be important for later. But let's just move on here. And the terminal. Now it wants us to type in this tail command. And this is essentially a little log. This is a personal log for the program itself, not for the computer, but for the program. I'll have us click on the tutorial. This is part of what I mean about having to be able to learn quickly. Is oftentimes in programming, there's a lot of communication, a lot of reading. Sometimes it can be a lot of research. It just depends on how intimate a relationship you have with your client or with your task, or how well you know your code and whether techniques are going to be directly relevant. It wants us to move on real quick, and so we'll do that. And it's going to introduce us to a different game mechanic. And it just wants us to purchase one so that we get some passive income. We'll talk more about that in the next episode. Then it wants us to go into the city. That's one of the things that's kind of nice here, is that you actually have a little map, a little ASCII map. And each of these places is a place to get a job, just in case you need it. Or, well, you can't always get a job. Like, here you do some training for your, some of your stats. Here you do some more. Here we can buy some tech. And here we can try and play the stock market. So there's some good variety there. Let's go back and do what it tells us to do. Click on the tutorial. And now we finish the tutorial. Pretty simple overall. The most important part for people who haven't gone through it is going to be the script editor. This is where we're going to do most of the work it is that we're going to do. We'll do a lot of our research and stuff outside of the script editor, but we're going to be doing a lot of work in here. It's actually really, really important. So you'll notice that the words here have different colors. And as I move on to them, they'll become highlighted in different ways. The colors are actually there so that as you become more familiar with the language, you can actually breeze through them. You can read more easily because you know what things do. So these pink words are all keywords. They're words that you can essentially look up about the language all by themselves. The reason why that's important is because when you're programming, the further you get into programming, the more it's like you're creating a personal language just for accomplishing that task. And you'll see what I mean a little bit more later. Now, these blue words are often associated with functions. They do something. And functions are always going to have the parentheses. And you'll notice that the parentheses and the braces, when I have the cursor next to one, it puts a little box around the other one, the one that it's connected to. And this is super, super useful going forward. You'll notice that it actually skips whatever it needs to in order to tell you what the appropriate thing that's blocking is. Sometimes you get a lot of parentheses, you get a lot of braces, sometimes brackets, they get all mixed in with each other, and that creates a lot of bugs for people. So knowing that this is a feature is actually really stupid useful. Stupid useful. This green here, this NS, most of your text is not going to be green. I'll be honest with you. Okay. But NS specifically is almost always going to be green because it's recognized as a type. Whenever you see the NS, it means that you're talking with NetScript. NetScript is an API. It's an addition to the language under this version of NetScript. And that's, again, really useful because it means that you can take JavaScript you learn from almost anywhere if you're doing your own research and bring it in here and see how to make it work with NS, work with this mini browser. Each of your values, this is a value, each of your values will have different colors. So if I were to replace this with a number, say 1024, that's going to be purple. That true is also a value. True and false are also values. They're used for evaluation. Text, however, is going to be this yellow. And then white is associated with variable names. That's where most of the colors come in. As you get familiar with them, it'll be easier. The only other color that I didn't discuss was this gray here. This gray is a comment. And you'll see various levels of programs use different levels of commenting depending upon what the person needs. Comments are going to be a great resource for those who are particularly starting out. I will try and use comments whenever I can. Sometimes I'm good at it, sometimes I'm bad at it. I'm going to do my best. Down here, you've got some options. Don't need to really worry about these. You can change the theme, which will change the colors, but you'll notice that as you change the colors, the same kinds of things are going to change. So the keywords are going to be different from the functions, are going to be different from the variable names, are going to be different from the values. That's actually a pretty good looking theme there. And that's going to be true kind of across the board. There's a few different themes. If you need to, you can, edit them. That requires a little bit of understanding with code. So I wouldn't recommend it. In general, most of these settings are kind of just where you want to be. But if you do need to change the font size, you can do that depending upon your circumstance. I like to keep mine right there. Otherwise, this beautify, you'll notice it doesn't really do much here. This is really just going to apply spacing as you need to and indenting as you need to. It's not always going to get it right, but it definitely does a better job than just like pouring out the code all in one line. It makes it more readable, and readability is going to be important, particularly as you're learning. A big point of note here is the RAM. As we get into the game, RAM is going to be a major consideration, and you'll need to know where your RAM is coming from And this actually tells us the base cost of the script is 1.6 gigabytes and that the hacking function alone is 100 megabytes. So just by nature of using the hacking function, it's 100 megabytes. And if I go like that, you'll see that the hacking function goes away because I turned it into a comment. Really useful trick, by the way. And when I put it back, it goes back up. And then there's the save, which you can just use with Control S and the terminal. Up here at the top, you can have a couple of different tabs, so you can have multiple windows open. You'll see that come into play later. Not really a big deal for right now. It's just useful later. So with that, we can really just get down to what are you going to need to play this game? What are you going to need to continue on in terms of programming? The first thing is that every programmer has, whether it's in book form or online, I highly recommend online, is a reference. For this, since we're learning JavaScript, my reference of choice is MDN, or Mozilla Developer Network. It covers JavaScript, all of web-based technologies, all of browser-based technologies. And so as a result, since JavaScript is tied inherently to the browser initially, it's probably a good idea to use MDN because you can get all of that all in one place. And it's pretty thorough, and almost always it's pretty exact. It rarely makes errors. A good idea is to have a place to bounce ideas off of. Sometimes show off a little bit, and sometimes to even get some inspiration. GitHub is one of the best places to do that, because GitHub is a place where, programmers essentially put up their projects. It provides them some functional advantages, which we can talk about at a later date, but also it provides just a place to share the code, people to share ideas, people to collaborate. You can have some specific kinds of functional and constructive discussions on there. But then you also kind of need a place where, you need to be able to ask questions, particularly if you're learning. Stack Overflow, amazing for that. But Stack Overflow is not going to have the focus of that Bitburner, so they'll be able to answer questions like if you're having errors in your code specifically that aren't NetScript related. For that, you can use a Bitburner Discord, which you can get off of the Bitburner Reddit, which is another great place to share and ask questions. And everybody knows the feeling of success that you get when you make a cool program and make these big steps. So if you want to show off a little, nobody's going to be offended because everybody understands that. And that's really all we can cover without getting into the mechanics of the game. Next episode, we'll actually get into mechanics, start working with code and doing all of that noise.